Assalamu alaikum and greetings everyone. Welcome to the Mullah Asghar Ali Library and Resource Center, popularly known as MARC, for our program Conversations with Authors. My name is Shabir Jaffer and I'm one of the directors here. Every month we invite an author or an academic from the Muslim community to join us, talk about their work and answer some questions. If you'd like to know more about what we do as an organization, please visit our website at markresource.org. That's markresource.org. You can also sign up to receive news of our future events and access videos of past interviews with academics and authors. So now, let's meet today's author. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce you to S.K. Ali, Sajida Ali. She is a New York Times best-selling, award-winning author of several critically acclaimed books, including Saints and Misfits, and the recently released Misfit in Love, which People magazine named a best book of the summer. Her novel, Love from A to Z, was the first young adult title chosen as an NBC Today Show's Read with Jenna book club selection. She also co-edited the book that we're going to be focusing on today, which very appropriately and fortuitously is called Once Upon an Eid, given that we just celebrated Eid. She has a degree in creative writing and she lives in Toronto with her family. So let's bring her in now. Sister Sajida, Assalamu alaikum, and thanks for joining us.
Walaikum assalam. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Shabir, Brother Shabir, for inviting me.
You're
happy
very welcome.
to meet everybody and talk books.
Yeah, talk books and literary skills. So let's go into it right away. Tell us about your journey towards becoming an author of children's and young adult books. What were some of the highlights of these journey, just briefly?
So I grew up loving reading and loving stories. My mother used to tell us stories when we would be, going to sleep. Fables from our cultural background is from India. Mm-hmm. And she would tell us, funny stories while we were going to sleep. And I just fell in love with stories. And very early on, after, I became a voracious reader. And I remember having this goal when I was in, I think it was 6th grade, where I looked at the library at our school and I was like, I want to read every single book in this place. And so instead of just being attracted to books by their covers, I decided to go in order on the shelf and be like, I'm just going to read. It doesn't matter what the book is about. I'm going to read it. That was like my goal. And so from that young age, I realized, telling my sister stories, I started telling my sister stories. I realized I wanted to be an author and tell stories. But that journey took a long time because while I did, right after high school, I did go get my creative writing degree. That's what I went to university for. I ended up, also going into education, being a teacher, which, if there's any teachers watching or anybody who works full time while having a family, that takes a lot of time out of you. So it was like 20 years that I spent teaching where I didn't actively pursue the dream of becoming an author. It was only, towards like the latter point of like my adult years when I started to think about, the dreams that I had when I was young and how, not all of them I'd put the energy and focus towards. So then I just decided with, support of some friends who were also pursuing their own dreams that, that they had wanted when they were young, that we all decided to put our energies into pursuing it actively. And that was 2006. And it took me 10 years from that time to get my first book published because I dedicated myself to learning about, completing a book because I had a degree in creative writing in which taught me a lot of things, but not about like actually how to like complete a whole novel and it just gave you, it didn't give me enough of the structural, like structuring your writing. And if there's anybody who wants to be an author listening, you know, there's those aspects of actually like being architecting a book that is very kind of almost like you're learning how to be a carpenter or something that's very hands-on. And there's those aspects of writing a book that I hadn't learned. So that journey took me 10 years. And then I got my first book published. So that it was a long held dream when I was a child that only got fulfilled when I actively pursued it, you know, and studied it when I was an adult. But
well,
yeah.
You made it. So congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. I first heard of you in 2019 when your book, The Proudest Blue, came out. You co-wrote that with the US Olympic medalist. Yep, that's the one. The US Olympic medalist Ibtihaj Muhammad. And that was published in 2019. There's a line on the front cover describing it as a story of hijab and family. How did you get involved in bringing Ibtihaj's story to print?
Yeah, so that was very, I don't know, I feel like it was just a blessed, you know, joining in together, because I had met Ibtihaj Muhammad at a conference, at a Muslim conference earlier. And somehow like we, you know, we were talking a little bit about, you know, I said I was an author, and she said, oh, I want to write stories too. But it was just like a simple, you know, exchange while I was meeting her, and she's having a meet and greet. And then a few months later, you know, her agents, her creative and managing agents, reached out to the literary agency that represented my work and asked if there was any Muslim authors that could help Ibtihaj write a book. And my agency, I was the only Muslim author with them. So then they said yes. You know, they asked me, and I said yes, I would love to do that. And when I connected with her, we were like, oh, that's so funny, because we had just like in passing, you know, talked about writing, and it ended up that our agencies were connected, and that's how it came to be. And then we you know, we had interviews with each other. We talked about our issues growing up wearing hijab from a very young age. Both of us started hijab when we were in 6th grade, and we each had similar, very, very similar experiences. So it was, alhamdulillah, I feel like it was a blessed kind of, you know, bringing us together with similar experiences. And then we were able to write, you know, a story together. Yeah.
That must have been quite an experience.
Yes, it was amazing.
Turning now to your publication, your book, Once Upon an Eid, as I said earlier, and it's an anthology of short stories for children, which you co-edited with Aisha Saeed. What a perfect time to discuss it, given that we just celebrated Eid al-Adha a few days ago. So a belated Eid Mubarak to you too, and to all our listeners, by the way.
Yes.
I read every story in this book. It was obvious why children, especially Muslim children, would like it. The theme of Eid and the hope and joy that it brings is central to every story in the book. It gives children something that they can relate to. I mean, Muslim children. It's not something that they can necessarily do with other children's books. So how did the idea of creating this anthology of Eid-related stories come about? I know you involved 15 different Muslim writers, including you and Aisha. Your stories are in there too. How did that come about? And what were some of the challenges and considerations as you decided which stories and which authors to include? Just tell us briefly about that.
Yeah, so the idea came about because I noticed that a lot of the books coming out, and she already published, that featured, you know, marginalized characters like Muslims, marginalized in greater society. They really focused on pain and trauma. And I just had a thought, like, what does it feel like to be a young person growing up and reaching for a book that features somebody like you, and it only talks about your pain? And I just had, like, you know, I just had this eureka that you must kind of feel like, wait, is this all we're about? We're only about our struggles. So I reached out to my friend Aisha Saeed, who's a New York Times bestselling author of amazing books. And I asked her if she'd join me in getting together some authors who felt similarly, because she also, also agreed, because she has, kids of her own. And she was imagining the same scenario, that they're going to only read about sad stuff, so she loved the idea. And then we just, for a selection of authors, there's not that many authors writing Muslim characters in books, so we just went through everybody we knew who was writing for children that had written about Muslim characters, and we just reached out to them. And everyone who was available and was on board, and they were like, yes, we want to do this. So it was just like, it took like from the time that I contacted her to everyone saying yes, it was like literally like a couple of weeks, like not even 2 weeks went by, and it just came together. So alhamdulillah, yeah. I think everybody was, everyone did this, the stories, their contributions, everyone did this from their heart, and because they all believed in the same purpose and the same, they had the same passion. Yeah.
Well, I'd recommend it to any parents of children of that age. It's the stories in the book relate to Eid experiences, celebrating Eid or anticipating Eid for Muslims from diverse backgrounds from all over the world, not just North America or Europe. And all of them are very well written. I have to confess that even though I'm not a kid, I did enjoy some of them quite a bit, more than others. There are stories about both boys and girls in there. I obviously enjoyed the boy-related ones, like Kareem means generous and gifts. There were a couple of girl-related ones, which made an impression on me too. For instance, Just Like Chest Armor, which is about a young girl putting on hijab. How important do you think it was to have a gender balance of characters in your choice of stories? Is it easy to overlook boys, given that more children's books, I think, are written by women?
So we wanted, when we first set out to do this project, we were very committed to diversity, because when, we know as Muslims, how we're having grown up in North America, and just that as Muslims, we are stereotyped as being, this one kind of, from this one kind of background, this, whatever it is, we're often stereotyped and put into boxes. While we Muslims know the reality is that we're so diverse, diverse in so many different ways, besides culture, besides, background, besides sect, beside whatever it is, there's also diversity of economic struggles, of like, feeling outside of the Muslim community. If you move to an area where there's only one mosque and it's like made up of people of a community that you haven't really got to know, there's that feeling of exclusion. There's so many different experiences, and we wanted to capture all that. So one of them was that we don't make it that there's only stories featuring Muslims who are boys or girls, or like, wanted to have that balance. We actually even set out to try to make sure that there were male authors included, and we tried really hard, but unfortunately the Muslim male authors we corresponded with, they weren't available to take part, so it ended up being all female authors. But very early on, we had everybody say like what their stories are going to be, who their main characters are. We had like a table, and we looked, and when we saw that it was like more this way or that way, we asked people to like, we just gave them feedback. Is there a possibility to change it, or to change who you're writing about? But it came out that like a lot of the stories, they did feature like boys, and then we were happy about that. And then I think 1 or 2 people changed just to make sure that there was a balance.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I think as many of the participants were mothers and they have their sons, and like they understood, like they could very easily switch to writing about a different experience, and that was good. So alhamdulillah.
I really liked the story called The Feast of Sacrifice by Hina Khan.
Yes.
It was about a couple, it was about two children who were going to stay with their grandparents because their father and mother were leaving to go and perform Hajj. And it reminded me of how my wife and I also left our two daughters in the care of their grandparents when we traveled to perform our first Hajj in 1997. The story was a very nice way to prepare kids whose parents are going for Hajj, to think about what their parents are off to do and why it's important, but also to ensure that they are settled and behaving well at home. Would you agree with that?
Yes. I loved that there was, that experience captured, because, when we talk about Eid stories, oftentimes, maybe because of the way that Eid is also, the Eid al-Fitr, the one at the end of Ramadan, is often highlighted, that people forget about the other Eid. And so we were so happy to get that story of like what that Eid captures. It's about the Hajj, those days, and capping that. So it was really amazing to explore what it looks like, sacrifice looks like for kids as well. Like, you think your Eid is going to be this way, or you think you're going to be with your parents, and then but things change. And what is that? What is that? Like, you're giving up something, you're giving up the quote unquote normalcy of your life for something bigger and greater for others. And so that was it was a good capturing of what that means.
Right. Two of the stories recount the grueling and heartbreaking ordeals of fellow Muslims, like N.H. Senzai's Searching for Blue, which is the story of the Syrian refugee experience, and Eid Pictures by Jamila Thompson Bigelow, which briefly references West African slaves coming to America. Why was it important to you and Aisha to include these particular stories?
So one of the things that I know, having been a teacher, like I mentioned, for 20 years, and I taught young children, second grade, third, mostly those grades, and is that kids can handle challenging topics. They can, they're curious about the world and their societies and what's going on, and there are ways to bring them into what the world that they're part of includes, hardship, pain, and trauma and stuff. There are ways to include them in a very sensitive way that is still filled with hope. And so both of these that you brought up, N.H. Senzai's Searching for Blue, which is about a boy who's a refugee, who's part of a refugee community off the coast. I think it's in Greece. And so he's a Syrian boy who remembers what his father taught him. Father passed away, and how he's trying to understand how there could still be happiness, and Eid is coming, and how do you make happiness after such a thing? And so the community really, I don't want to give spoilers, but the community, having community of any sort around you and what that brings is explored.
Right.
And I think kids can understand that there'll be times that they've had times of hardships, of their own hardships in their lives in different ways, whether it be something happening at school or, something, they've personally experienced in some other setting, that they can take the kind of lessons that just all these stories are not lesson kind of driven, like it's not to make up like a teaching point, but while the children are reading, they can put themselves in the shoes of these characters and see how they got through something, and then similarly apply that, hopefully, to their lives. For the one about the slaves, it was really important, like I mentioned, for us to capture diversity. And 1/3 of our community is a Black Muslim background, and especially the foundational Muslim communities in North America descended from those who were forced here as slaves. And just the idea of like that historical connection, and what would Eid have looked like for people who weren't allowed to, who were denied their whole lives and their whole identities and their humanity.
Yes.
What would it have looked like for, Jamila Tompkins Bigelow, who is part of, the community of Black Muslims in Philadelphia, who wanted to look at it through the lens of like a person, whose family had that background in it. What does it look like? Like, I mean, what can she say about it looking back?
Yeah.
And so that was a chilling, a really, important, I think it's an important thing, especially, we're in Canada, and, all of these stories of Indigenous children who were taken away from their families. And as a teacher, I know that I've spoken about those things to young kids, and they've understood it, and they are able to process it and not let it like dampen their views of the world, but just help them see their part in helping to be a better like human being.
Yeah.
Knowing that these are the things that could happen if you choose not to like open your eyes and choose not to be on the right side of things, right? So kids get that, they really understand that, and so that we wanted to make sure to include that in the book.
Other stories taught or teach children good values, like the story Creative Fixes, where one of the memorable lines is, "It's hard to see the beauty in things when you can't see past your own insecurities." Or another line that was memorable, "You can't control everything in life. Share your burdens with your family." That was in Taste. What role do you think children's books play in teaching them life skills?
I think that children, obviously, like they take in a lot of things from their surroundings, from where they are, and what they read, what they watch. All of those things affect the way they and any human being interacts with the world and with the issues that they're thinking about. And I think for myself, I told you that I was a voracious reader, the books I read helped me to understand the things that I was going through, and the things that I didn't know yet about, but had then some ideas about. And so, like, for young children, to not have literature that actually reflects their personal experiences, they're going to read other books and other, watch other things and like try to put it to their experiences. And that's like sometimes a struggle. Whereas when you have books that like Once Upon an Eid, which really like they have so many more connections to. Now, as a teacher, I'm not a teacher anymore, but I once a teacher, always a teacher. One of the things in reading that's really emphasized is making connections. Research shows that if kids cannot make connections to what they're reading, it's harder for them to become a reader. And one of the things that like we used to do in teaching reading is ask kids when after they read a text to say, ask them what's your connections to this book. And what they found out is, especially for a lot of standardized testing and stuff that happens in a lot of schools in North America, kids who didn't have, like, for example, there was one example I can give you is on one of the standardized tests, there was this whole focus on this cottage trip, and the kids in a family taking a cottage trip, and the kids who were reading it in the inner city settings who hadn't had the experience of going to a cottage And, I think there was some growing zucchinis with the grandmother in there, and they hadn't had those kind of experiences. They didn't do well on the test because they couldn't make a connection to those experiences and just, immerse themselves into it to understand it fully. And the kids who had those experiences, of course, they scored higher and stuff. So kids need to have texts that they can just fall into, because they're like, oh yeah, I do this with my, grandma, or I had this happen. And so many parents have sent me like, messages and pictures of their child reading this book.
Yeah.
And saying that their kids come up to them and say, my name is in this book. And, or like, they did the same thing we did on Eid and stuff. And that is the way to grow readers and to grow a love of reading, right? The connections part. So I forgot your initial question because I went off on this, but it, making connections, and that, like, you talked about like the values and stuff. The values are universal. We say this book is for all readers, regardless if you're Muslim or not.
Right.
So those values will transcend any any community. Like, it won't be just for our communities, but it will be for everyone. But the experiences talked about in it will really resonate with kids who've had experiences that are linked to being Muslim. You'll see quite a lot of that, and that is so important for just reading in general. So
okay, thank you. There were two stories that made I guess the biggest mark on me. They were Not Only and Only by Huda al-Marashi, and Kareem Means Generous by Asma Hussein. I was impressed by how they both enjoined the value of friendship with people from other communities meaning other Muslim communities as well as other non-Muslim communities. They really talked to that. Is this something that needs reinforcing to children in these somewhat turbulent times that we live in?
Yes, definitely. I think it's something that needs emphasis throughout all times, but especially like you mentioned, when there's so much focus on division and not diversity for its beauty, but like on differences and divisions for people not being like us. So don't, kind of like pushing people away from each other. And so that just kind of naturally seems to be occurring in so many different, like, just pockets of our society, besides like news and besides, greater things. There seems to be also on different social medias where, there's like even the whole generational wars of like, oh, Gen Z is like this, and this, millennials are like this, and all of this, like, kind of like just compartmentalizing and boxing people up, and young kids, can pick up on that. And so it's very important, as especially like, both the stories you mentioned, we wanted to make sure with Not Only and Only, which is written by Huda al-Marashi, who is of she's of Shia background, and we wanted to make sure that we had voices that were, parts of our different communities. And so we actively set out for that. And just because, growing up, like, I had friends of different parts of our communities, and we saw through that, like, oh, we do things this way, we saw past that, and we were like, we're all Muslims, right? And so so that was like something that, and I was afraid that, I don't know if that experience I had growing up is still happening, and I'm afraid of that. So there was that aspect, and then just the neighborhood, like in the story Kareem Means Generous, it's about being a good neighbor too, right? Like, somebody moving in and being like, not being close to people. So so it was just important because those are all Muslim values, right? Like, and so and it's Muslim values that again transcend our community. They're God, God
Inspired.
inspired, right?
Yeah.
For all different communities. So we wanted to make sure that we had that. And yeah, and we're so fortunate for the authors being so amazing at like capturing those things that we didn't say right about this,
Right.
It was all there. It was all from them that these stories came about, and they fit so beautifully together.
Good. Yes, as I said, they made the biggest mark on me, those two. But the story that had me creased up with laughter, Sajida,
Yes.
was Eid and Pink Bubblegum.
Yeah.
by Randa Abdul Fattah.
Yeah.
This story was so entertaining. I actually read the whole thing out to my wife one evening, and she ended up in stitches too. I mean, humor was a key tool or an instrumental tool here. Is that a sure way to make children read more, the use of humor?
There's different kinds of readers, obviously, and like young kids, like they love stories that really pull out the extreme emotions. So I know that a lot of kids that I taught, they loved really funny books and then really scary books, like something really, really right. Like it has to be really like really impactful. So a story
so scary is as good as humorous, right?
Yes.
Okay.
We actually didn't have a scary story here, but but the Eid and Pink Bubblegum, inshallah, we wanted to end on that note. Like we put the story right at the end because we wanted to have you, when you finish the book, close the book and just have that smile on your face. So that's what that story was. And I think for that story we talked about like before about how like connections and stuff, and I think a lot of people have had that experience of being in an endless seeming car ride or a journey that just doesn't seem to end, and being stuck with people that kids, your siblings or whoever it is that you're just like so different from, and you're trying to hold it in, right? So that was the whole story, and it was really cute, and really happy that it was just so funny because like she actually, Randa Abdul Fattah is an Australian author who actually, like, her book was the first one I read that had a Western hijabi character. Like until then I hadn't read any story like that. So she took the mission of Once Upon an Eid being about joyful stories. She took it right to heart and just was like, I'm going to give you a story that's just going to make you like just laugh, right? And we're so happy about that.
Certainly left a smile on my face. Okay, last question before we turn it over to our listeners. On a more serious note, more sober note, media reports state that literacy levels of many children have declined since the start of the pandemic, since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, because of not being in school, having to do a lot of online learning, no after school classes, etc. What is the role that children's books can play in helping to address this particular issue? And that is, as I said, literacy levels declining.
So I'm not like a literacy expert, but I know exactly what you're talking about schooling, the disruption of regular schooling having an impact on kids and their progress. And it's not at the same. Yet at the same time, I do believe that with hardship comes ease, which is in the Quran, right? And so I believe that looking at some of the things that happened as well, like where families got to spend more time together, book sales started to go up. And so looking at the fact that maybe hopefully for a lot of people, a lot of families, maybe it also brought reading more into their lives, hopefully. And books I know that, a lot of people homeschooled, right? And during that time, or had to partly homeschool because school went online, and, parents were more involved with what their kids are learning and stuff. So
Yes.
as as somebody who's homeschooled on and off as well, my own children, I know that reading, having just books to read is enough of a literacy program almost, because that's the foundation of literacy, right? Reading is the foundation of literacy. And I know that for some, like I know some, kids who are homeschooled who did really, they did, after they re-entered school, they were very, successful in different areas, including literacy. And the way that they're homeschooled was just by reading. Like the only thing they did was read. Right. And because what reading does is it actually, the more you read, and the more you immerse yourself in reading, it has like an instant effect even on your writing, where you don't like, because writing is not a skill that you learn like math or, that there's instruction. I know in some of the traditional ways of teaching writing, it was like, you have the noun and all, the parts of writing and stuff, but that's actually not been research proved to be a good way to teach writing. And writing usually, if you read a lot and you immerse yourself in reading, you kind of start beginning to emulate the kind of reading that you're like. If you're reading good literature, it starts like kind of like magically like affecting your writing. And I'm saying this as a person who never loved learning writing in that structured way, yet I was like, very early on, I was like, teachers would say I was the best writer in the class, but I would not do well on those kind of like, I don't know, how grammatical way of learning writing. And the only difference that I had was I was reading so much. So just reading by itself, just books, just immersing yourself in just a lot of literature affects literacy on like all of the different aspects of literacy, including writing. And I don't know about speaking. Maybe for speaking, you'd have to like develop that in a different way. But yeah, reading can just kind of undo some of the, if you've seen like a fall in your children's like levels, getting just even, getting, and when I say reading, I mean children led reading. For example, what books did they like? What are their interests? And more like, like, because a friend of mine texted me, was like, oh, is this book okay? And it was a book that was very like popular with young kids. And I said, of course it is. Does your son like it? And she was like, yeah, he likes it, but is it okay? And I said, yes, if he likes it, it's okay. Like if it's meant, like, publishers are pretty good about making sure that whatever they publish for a certain age group fits that age group, like it's not going to be talking about things that are not suitable for that age group. So like, and I'm talking about like middle grade kids books and stuff, which is like 4th, 5th, 6th grade. So yeah, let them be driven by their interests, and and there'll be phases when they're only interested in like silly sounding books, like you talked about, like funny stories, and that's fine, and that's fine, and that's wonderful, and or scary, creepy stories, and that's great. It eventually evolved to different interests.
Right. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's about time we turned over to our listeners. At the moment, I don't see any questions on the chat line. However, if our listeners would like to send one in, please do so. I don't see any hands up either. So I do have a reserved question to ask you while our listeners may be deciding what to write. And so I'm going to ask you, I didn't want to leave you and Aisha Saeed out. So allow me a little levity with this question. Is it pure coincidence that your two stories Yusuf and the Great Brownie Mistake, and the other one, Donut Break Tradition. They're both about sweet treats. Was that a coincidence?
No, it was really funny because when we actually decided, to go out with this project and to publishers, our agents told us, could you write the stories that are going to show the publishers what you're talking about? So Aisha and I were the stories that, our stories were the ones that were submitted to publishers. And we wrote these in isolation from each other. And then when we passed them to each other to have like a little another eye on it, we were both surprised that, wow, we both focused on food that you eat on Eid. And that was interesting and funny. But then it ended up that almost every single story focuses on food. There's like some, ours was sweet treats, but some way there is like a food focus in every story. Like there's something about food, whether it be in sorry, I'm just trying to find this story again. Whether it be in the story about, where did I get Creative Fixes, right? Where there's a story about a girl who's new to the Muslim community. Her family's a convert, and she's not used to the spiciness of like biryani or, a food that's different for her. And there's still a focus on the food. And so we found that very interesting. And I was like, that seems to be a link, between all our different communities, that food is very important on Eid. Bringing people together through food is something that it just seems to happen. And, I think that's great to capture that. And it also actually transcends then our communities, because a lot of reviewers who are Muslim, they love that aspect, because traditionally for the holidays that's traditionally celebrated by, society here, Christmas, all of those, they also feature food, and we know about the food of those holidays, right? Like we're so immersed in the ways that Christmas is celebrated and Thanksgiving. We know the foods typically associated with those holidays. And for people to discover Eid, because Eid is celebrated with so many different people around the world, that there's no singular foods, there's no like everybody eats this. No, everybody doesn't, so that's that was interesting for people to find out. And I love that.
Yes.
Question.
Eid is celebrated with tables full of food. May that tradition always continue. Okay, we have our first question coming in from one of our listeners. It's from Iman, who's in California. Were you specifically looking for fictionalized stories in this collection, or did you hope for stories from authors' childhoods?
No, we set out because all of us, I think every single one of us, actually, no, I think there are two authors who do nonfiction. But majority of the authors featured on here are fiction writers. So we knew that we wanted a collection of stories, whether it be in prose format or poetry or whatever format it was supposed to be, like fictional. And nobody really thought of like submitting a more narrative nonfiction piece, though I know that like as fiction writers, we kind of process our own lives and our own experiences and turn them out into fiction, right? So I think that most people did reach into some aspect, of their experiences and backgrounds. Like I know for like Not Only and Only, the author to discuss with us how that's happened to her before, where there's times when her family had to be part of a greater numbered Muslim community where they didn't, know if they fit in totally. So everyone kind of processed their real experiences and brought like it into their stories. So yeah, it was good that way.
Okay. And we have another one, I think. Let's just see. No, no other questions from our audience. Let's give them a couple of seconds here to see if they have anything. Oh, here comes another one.
Yeah.
Again from Iman. She says, I know I've purchased at least 7 of these books around Eid for gifts.
Oh, thank you.
So I was wondering, do you have sales numbers that you can share? What about sales to libraries? I'm curious to know the reach of this book.
So the way it works in publishing is the sales numbers they're very sporadically shared. Not sporadically, sorry. They're shared way later after the book comes out. So right now we don't have hard numbers. We just know that the publisher's very happy with the way that it's selling. And that, it's a perennial, they hope it to be a perennial title that is shared around Eid, but not only around Eid, because we kind of try to emphasize through our outreach efforts with educators and librarians that this book is not just to be pulled out at Eid time by teachers or librarians, that it reflects a variety of Muslim experiences that can be shared at other times as well. So we try to emphasize that because we didn't want it to be just pegged as an Eid book, but that it's a, it's kept, it's just a book with Muslim characters. And in terms of sales, something that every contributor on this agreed to when we had the idea that because this was a capturing of like as many different experiences as we can get. We also recognize that it obviously can capture every Muslim experience, and there's a lot of Muslim experiences of where Muslims are in trauma, occupation, pain, some kind of war, displacement. So because we wanted to make sure that those voices and those people's experiences were somehow taken into consideration, every single contributor and the editor, Aisha Saeed and I, we said that all royalties from the book we give to a relief organization that helps humans, regardless of background around the world.
Oh, that's tremendous. That's great.
So everyone agreed to that. So, but the thing with royalties is that it has to get to the place of royalties. So we thank everyone who's purchased a book and as either gifts or for themselves or friends in, schools. It would be great as well to give to different schools. I know it's in schools, but I don't know how many schools. But once it sells enough copies to generate royalties, then that money will go to, and I don't know if it's there yet. I think we'll know in September.
Got it.
It's like a year and a half after that we know. So it's around the corner when we'll know how well it's done. Yeah.
Okay. We have a third question. What advice do you have to offer up-and-coming Muslim authors?
Oh, okay. I give you the advice that, don't be defined by what came before you. Write according to your experiences, regardless of the eye that you think is going to look at it. I don't know if I'm explaining myself, but I'm trying to say, don't mold or shape yourself to what's already out there. Because, for example, that was something that stopped me a lot from, really setting out. It's because I was looking at the published books out there, and I didn't see like where mine would fit in. And then I had to have this aha that the reason I couldn't envision where mine would fit in is because all of those books were chosen by people who were like, the publishing industry is a very gate kept industry. Like they one of my editor actually of my first two novels, she's the only Muslim editor in publishing actually, until recently it started to change. And she said in interviews that there was experiences of like a Muslim authored book being brought into the acquisitions meetings.
Yes.
Because before a book can be published, the publisher discusses it in a big meeting. It's called an acquisitions meeting, where they discuss whether they should buy the book. And she heard things where people said with a Muslim like character book, well, who wants to read about a Muslim family, right? And they just shut it down. And that reality, that certain experiences were kept out of the bookstores, libraries, and everything, just by people who didn't want Muslim voices, who didn't want diverse voices. If that's the reality is that people are making these decisions, and it's not the marketplace, and it's not like readers that are making the decisions. It's like people who are not interested in these stories.
Yes.
And as a writer, you have to not be limited by that. You cannot say, well, they don't want our stories, or it doesn't look like our stories are out, like the story I'm trying to tell is out there. You have to be like, you have to move to the beat of your own drum.
Right.
You have to be like, what's the story I want to tell? What is a story that I want to see, like that I want to read, or that I like, I just, that you're eager for. Right. And also like not cater it to any way that you think will work. Just write it for your own self, and please do not write it to prove anybody wrong about Muslims or anything, because that's another thing that I grew up with being told, in our communities and stuff, was like, they have bad views about Muslims, so prove that it's not true. But what that does is it puts an agenda that somebody else has chosen for you. Like if someone has chosen to see Muslims this way, then your job in life is not to explain that away. Your job in life should be to live like according to like our values, our teachings, are like, and live proudly and live confidently like that, and then write what you want to write, and that should be your agenda, right? And then that will transform that other, maybe that'll transform that other view of, so tell the stories you want to tell. Don't be defined by what came before you, because that did not include you for a reason.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Yeah. Good advice indeed. Thank you. And I think on that we will close. There are no more questions. So let me thank you first, Saeed, for agreeing to join us today and telling us about your experience as an author and talking about what you obviously love to do, which is write stories.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
My pleasure.
Thanks for your time. And the second thing I need to do, if you just hang on for a couple more minutes, is preview the next Conversations with Authors session, which will be taking place on August 28th. And the person I'll be talking to on that day is a man by the name of Murtaza Mirali Devji. He's not an author, or he's not a professional author or an academic in the true sense of the word, but he is a young man with a story to tell. And it's a very inspirational story. And it's called Ability Through Disability. It actually comes in two parts 1 and 2. And it's essentially a story about the hope and courage he exemplified when he was diagnosed as a teenager with a severe disability, and how he managed and coped and dealt with that, and how he worked with that throughout his life. And the message is one of positivity, it's of optimism. And I think it says it in one of the bylines, which is, I don't want people to feel pity for me. I want them to know that I'm a positive person with a lot of hope for the future. And so I'll be talking to Murtaza on August 28th at the same time, 12 noon. I hope you'll be able to join us, because I think it'll be a fascinating conversation. So with that, I would say thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you obviously to Sajida again, but thank you to all our listeners for coming in and asking questions and listening to us. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you all a pleasant and safe weekend until I see you next time. Take care.